Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma, and addiction. My name's Ash, and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Joining us on the show today is Deb Masner. Deb is the founder of the Alcohol Tipping Point, a place to find free resources, tools, and tips to help you change your drinking. Deb runs 30-day dry months where she helps people practice not drinking. She's also a registered nurse, certified health and wellness coach, smart recovery facilitator, and most importantly, an alcohol-free badass. I had the pleasure of being a guest on Deb's podcast back in April. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, you can head to the Alcohol Tipping Point podcast, of course, once you've finished this episode here with us today. And with that, I'd love to welcome Deb onto the show. Deb, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Ash. And yeah, your podcast episode just came out from when we're recording, and it's just wonderful to be able to connect with you again.
It really is. We had so much fun recording that episode, so I'm really excited that I'm able to get you on to Behind the Smile to share a bit of your story today. So before we dive into the photo that I've asked you to share with us, I'd love for our listeners just to get to know you a little bit better. So can we start off with you sharing, where do you live? What does an average day look like? And what do you do for fun?
Oh, okay. Well, I live in the United States. I'm in Boise, Idaho. So I am in the mountains. We're on like the northwest side of the United States. And you asked, what does an average day look like for me? Well, getting up early, taking my daughter to school. I have one daughter who's 13 and the other one's 16. She can now drive herself to school, so that's nice.
Wow.
And yeah, it is so nice. And then now that I've been working, just doing my ATP work, I'll say ATP for Alcohol Tipping Point. So a typical day might involve doing a coaching call. It could be recording a podcast, doing a workout, having lunch. I try to get like a meditation in each afternoon before I go pick up my daughter from school. She gets done at 2:30. Bring her back here, chill out, maybe do some more work, have dinner together. Maybe watch some Ted Lasso with my husband at night, take a bath, something like that. So that's kind of just a basic day.
I love that. And what about for fun? How do you let your hair down these days?
Oh, for fun. Well, I recently learned how to ski. So this is my second season skiing. So we've been going up and doing that on the weekends. And I love to dance. I take a body jam class, which body jam is from Les Mills out of New Zealand. So closer to your side of the world. Yeah. So, but actually I've been doing jam for a long time. So I love to do that. I love to just take a walk and just enjoy life. I love to travel. That was more than one thing that I do for fun, but that was a few.
I have to admit, when you said that your daughter is 16 and she drives herself to school, that's really like hard for me to wrap my head around, because where I grew up in Australia, you don't get your license until you're 18.
Even now?
Yeah. New South Wales, which is Sydney, that's I think 17. But in Victoria, Melbourne, where I live, it's 18.
Oh, yeah. She could take driver's ed. You can start it at 14 and a half.
Wow, that seems so young. Oh my gosh. And tell me, with the skiing, is that sort of very, because you live in the mountains, so are the ski fields really close for you?
Yeah, we have our own little not private, it's actually public ski resort, if you will. It's called Bogus Basin. So that's like our local mountain. And then I live near, probably your listeners maybe have heard of Sun Valley. That's like a really
Mm.
worldwide famous ski resort. So we're like a couple hours from there, and a couple hours from like a variety of other ski places. But we like our local mountain. It's just like a
Yeah.
really special place.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. I love skiing, and to get to any snow from where I live is about, I mean, I think minimum 4 hours. The best field I think is about 6 hours drive, but so I only kind of get there once a year unless I can get overseas. So love that you are enjoying that skiing and being outdoors. And I suppose I imagine these are all things that you probably weren't doing much of when you were still drinking.
Well, I did snowboard back in the day when I thought I was cool. And I still did do body jam and dance, but not as well, I have to say, now that I can
Mm.
use my brain. The choreography is so much easier. That's for
I love
sure.
that. Now, Deb, I've asked you to bring in a photo with you today. And this is a photo from a time in your life where your insides didn't match your outsides. You were hiding behind a smile, presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the reality was you were really struggling on the inside. I'd love for you to describe for our listeners what's going on in this photo. What am I looking at right now? Because, of course, they can't see this photo, but you can check it out on my Instagram at ashbutters and the website ashbutters.com. But for those who cannot see the photo right now, I'd love you to describe not only what am I looking at, but also what was going on for you in your life at that time.
Yeah, well, this is a family photo of myself, my husband, Jason. We've now been married over 20 years. Our dog,
Wow.
Walter, and then my two daughters I mentioned, who at the time of the photo, I think this was back in 2014. So they were like 3 and 5, I want to say. And so it's just like your classic family photo. We're all looking at the smile or at the camera and smiling. And I just remember like that time when they were like preschool, young age. I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband was working the whole time. And that was just like when my drinking got really bad. And I remember actually doing this photo shoot. It was just in our yard. We just had a neighbor friend that was practicing taking pictures come over, and I remember like carrying my beer bottle around from place to place where we were taking our pictures. Like I couldn't even be away from it. I was like one of my little girls, like who had their
Mm.
security blanket or something. Um, so I just think about that time in my life when I was being like a super mom. I was president of their preschool parenting board. I was doing like all the parent things that you're supposed to do, and all the arts and crafts and activities. And um, I was like really strict about bedtime, and just like being a mom was part of my life. But also, I was like sneaking how much I was drinking, and I was
Mm.
hiding it from my husband, and I would hide stuff like in cabinets and whatnot.
Mm.
Um, and so that's what that picture encapsulates for me. You know, it was still
Mm.
years later where I did stop drinking. That was
Mm.
quite a process. But I would
Mm.
say that was probably more of a tipping point, if you will, for me.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into how you gave up alcohol. I really want to know more about that. But for a moment, can you share with me what was your emotional state at that time? Like, what was actually going on in your life for you to be drawn to the bottle? And were you using it as like something to numb out? Was it habitual? Like, how did that all unfold?
Yeah, I think I was just feeling overwhelmed by parenting and toddlers and tantrums, and I didn't have my own identity or outlook. At the time, my husband was working, you know, well over 40 hours. He would basically get up, shower, leave, and then come home around 6:30. He would either go play like poker at the time, he was getting into that, or he would just be online playing video games. And I just like felt really alone and
Mm.
overwhelmed, and just like I never had a break. when you have really young kids, it just feels like you never get a break. And so for me, alcohol just became a way to tap out mentally, but still be there physically.
Yeah. You hear that a lot, don't you? It's this whole phenomenon of mummy wine culture and how it can be glamorized and almost encouraged as a, don't worry, it's wine o'clock somewhere in the world. And so there's this very almost encouraged behavior around drinking as a way to get through, I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me right now, to get through the day or get through bed and bath time. But the reality is what it's actually promoting is a disconnection, a checking out, and a removal of yourself from the actual experience and being in that present moment and being connected to what you're doing and who you're with.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then I think an overcompensation too, because on the other end of things, then I would be like, well, I'm going to go to the Y every day. I'm going to work out. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to be, involved in their preschool. I'm going to be making sure we have like stimulating activities. I'm going to take them to the park. I'm going to, have play date,
Mum of the year.
but without being mom of the year. Right. And so, yeah, it's so interesting.
Can we travel back to your childhood for a moment? I'd really love to get a bit of a picture around what your family life was like growing up. What was your home environment like? And were there any significant moments that you think shaped your relationship with alcohol in your later years?
Oh, that's interesting. My brother and I talk about this a lot because I think that we had a great childhood. He has some of his own issues and whatnot. He is also sober, by the way. He's just celebrated his 2 years. So, woo.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah. But my parents were really young. So my parents got married. They eloped the day after my mom turned 18. And then they had 3 kids by the time she was 21. And they're still together. They just celebrated their 50-year wedding anniversary.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but they stayed together. There are 3 of us growing up in this college town. I grew up at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. And they were involved in, like, my dad had a restaurant and my mom was a counselor up there. And so I never really felt like, oh, there's something that specifically happened to me in childhood. I do sometimes question this. I'm curious about your thoughts too, but like, I always think like, how much trauma is carried over genetically? Because my mom had a very traumatic childhood with abuse, physically, sexually. She was abandoned. And my dad as well came from a divorced family and moved around. Like they both came from very typically traumatic backgrounds, came together and raised their kids. But I just, sometimes I'm like, what was it? And then also like along those lines, like, I think for a long time, I was always questioning, well, why am I drinking? Why am I like this? I didn't have anything traumatic happen to me. And that almost kept me stuck too. So it's just an interesting topic.
It's really interesting. For me, I didn't realize that I had experienced trauma in my life until I was sitting in rehab about a week and a half into my 3-week inpatient stay. And I was doing this process called a timeline, which we spoke about. And it was when I started looking at, I had to identify these different things that in my mind were like, oh yeah, and then that happened, and then that happened. And I didn't really think anything of it. I certainly wouldn't have classified them as traumas because I had been conditioned to believe that a trauma was something that was, and only something that was really big, like you just mentioned, a sexual assault, a physical beating. And so I wasn't able to identify these micro traumas or these small t traumas as they're often referred to today, which might be your parents not coming home at night, abandonment, all of these other things that start to creep up. And so I think there's the first thing of when you grow up in an environment, unless it's pointed out to you that that's not normal, then it's really hard to know that you experienced anything other than what you thought was normal. And then the other point you made about that generational trauma, I truly believe that there's a really strong line that runs through our family trees. I am the daughter of an alcoholic father, and then my mother is the daughter of an alcoholic father. And they experienced a lot of violence and instability in their upbringings. So I do think it carries down. And what ends up happening is that your parents parent you with the tools that they were given. So if that's coming from, like you just described, a chaotic environment, a family of divorce, then unfortunately they're not given the appropriate tools required. And so I think it just sort of becomes this domino effect of parenting down the line until a generation comes along where they say, no, I'm going to do it differently. And they press the pause button and they go back and they do the work. And then I think you start to see a shift. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see that. And I think I'm just really proud of my parents for how they showed up and how they have raised their kids. And so they really broke that cycle for sure.
Yeah. When were you first introduced to alcohol, Deb?
Well, I started drinking in junior high, so that would have been like 8th grade, 13. I remember sneaking. They had some old Jack Daniels around, and it was disgusting, but that was the first time I drank. And then I just kind of kept on drinking throughout junior high and high school. And it was really, because it was a really small town that I grew up in, it just kind of was our like extracurricular activity. At least it was mine.
Yeah, so all your friends were doing it. It was quite normalized to drink on the weekends. What did your drinking look like? Was it different to the people around you, or, what effect did it have?
Yeah, I mean, from high school and college on, I was binge drinking, heavy drinking. I would black out. I would throw up. Not everybody was that hardcore, but with the group of people that I did spend time with, it was definitely binge drinking. Absolutely. It was keg parties every weekend. It was because we lived in a university town and we have a Greek system, like a fraternity houses, notorious for parties. We would also like go out into the woods, out onto the mountain and drink. Like, yeah, I would say that at that time with the people I was spending time with, it was, everyone was drinking that way.
So it probably didn't feel problematic or anything that you needed to be aware of at that time.
No.
Were you hiding it from your parents?
Yeah. I mean, I think they knew. I was the youngest of the siblings. I'm sure they knew. Part of our party culture was all the other people that worked at my dad's restaurant. We all worked together and we'd go party together. So I know he knew. Every weekend we were out partying with all the other workers. Yeah, for sure.
I know for me that my drinking was really progressive. Like I started off similar to you, drinking to blackout from the very first instance, but then the regularity and the consistency and the amount that I needed to drink increased slowly over quite a long period of time. How did that play out for you, the progression?
Yeah, I think after college and not having the party people to party with, realizing like, oh, I still do this on my own every night. Now it became more sophisticated because it was drinking wine. And that's when like the whole wine culture got introduced. And so it became okay to like get a bottle of wine and drink that. And oh, I really like this. It became about the beverage. Whereas, I mean, admittedly, like in college and high school, it was like you would drink whatever you could and you would drink a lot of really crappy stuff. So I started to see a shift there where it wasn't even a social thing anymore. It was just come home every day from work and drink. And then it really ramped up after having kids, after being done breastfeeding and being home alone, it really ramped up. And then I started to kind of, in 2015, started to backtrack from it and take more breaks. I would always take like dry months, dry January, or I'd be training for a race or something, and I would take a dry month before that. So I'd be like, I'm fine. I don't have a problem. I was also working as a nurse, and taking care of people who were detoxing was part of my patient panel. And so I also was comparing myself to them, like, I'm not in the hospital, I'm fine. And so it was kind of interesting. So then I just started to slowly examine my relationship with drinking and unwind it.
It's really interesting what you said just then about the comparison that we do when we're in the throes of heavy drinking, because you can very easily always look to a situation that's worse than yours and then tell yourself that you don't have a problem. I remember I would do that with my dad. My dad, as I mentioned, is an alcoholic. He's in recovery. And every now and then I would blow up my life to a point where I would ask for help, and he would take me to a meeting. And I remember I'd sit there in these meetings and I'd listen to people share, and I'd think to myself, well, that's not me. I haven't got a DUI. I haven't lost my job. I haven't lost my partner. I'm different to these people. I'm okay. I've got this under control. And then I'd leave again. We talk about look for the similarities, not the differences, because we can sit there finding differences for days, and that's what keeps us apart from the solution and apart from the help and the recovery. And particularly when you're seeing people detoxing, if you're showing up to work, albeit hungover, you straight away you think, well, I don't have a problem because I'm still managing. What inspired you to become a nurse, Deb?
Well, I always wanted to help people. That has always been my focus. I originally went to school, actually got my psychology degree, and then I decided, well, I think I'm not sure I want to go on to grad school and do counseling and go down that route. And then I thought, what would be a really good career for me would be nursing, because I can still help people. I really was drawn to like the science side of things. I found that super interesting. A lot of psychology was very gray. And I liked how science is more black and white. I love learning about the body. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to help people.
I want to go back to this point around taking breaks or moderation. Some people will refer to it as. I was the same. I would always do Feb fast, dry July, and I would spend that 30 odd days really gritting my teeth, waiting, counting down the days, marking them off the calendar until I could drink again. What was your experience like with these breaks that you were taking? And then I'd also love to know, two-part question, for somebody listening who's also stuck in that cycle, what would you say to them?
Well, my experience initially taking breaks was about health, and about proving to myself that I didn't have a problem. And it was very temporary. So I knew, like, okay, if you can do 30 days, then you'll be fine. And now when I look at breaks, well, and just going back to what you were talking about, the whole comparison thing and problems. So I think what kept me stuck so long was trying to figure out if I had a problem and why I had a problem, instead of asking myself, like, would your life be better without alcohol? And how can you remove alcohol from your life? Or how can you explore that? Right. And so I think that now breaks, 30-day breaks, are a great time to really explore your relationship with drinking, because a lot of people don't go from realizing you have a problem with drinking to being done forever. Like it's a whole process. So I think of your relationship with alcohol is a relationship. And so just like any relationship, it did kind of start out as like a friend, and it started out as something good, right? And then it just became this toxic relationship. And then, like any breakup, it can be hard to break up. And maybe you don't know if you even want to or not. So there's always the pull coming back because you still kind of romanticized it. And society and culture romanticizes drinking so much. So, of course, you're being pulled back to it. So I think giving yourself time to explore your relationship with alcohol and using that time, using that break, like you mentioned, like I run monthly, I call them Alcoholidays because I think of it as a gift, right? It's a gift and it's something you're doing for yourself, but you're learning, okay, does alcohol really help me sleep? What are other ways that I can soothe myself? What are other ways I can cope with anxiety and stress? Because a lot of the times we've just been drinking at it. And so if you can give yourself like the grace and compassion and space to take a break and use that time to really examine the way alcohol is viewed in our culture and educate yourself about the health effects and, like I said, figure out other coping tools and whatnot, then you can decide after that break, like, okay, do I want to go back to drinking or maybe I don't? And I think what happens a lot is once you've opened the door, it's almost like the Matrix, like once you take the red pill, I don't remember which pill was which, but once you know, once you start to discover the truth about alcohol, then you can't go back to normal drinking. You know too much, right?
Drinking on knowledge is no fun.
Well, I liken it to ignorance is bliss. Because before it was like, well, everybody else is doing it. I'm just a lush. I'm just a heavy drinker. Yeah, I get hungover, but that's just what you do. But when you start to like really get brutally honest and examine the truth, and then also just see how you feel without it, and just notice like, hey, I'm sleeping so much better. I have so much energy. I have so much more focus. Like, then you're starting to learn that, okay, being alcohol free is actually more positive for me. Because we just get into the habit. I think for a lot of people, drinking has just become a habit. And
For sure.
yeah, and we're just on autopilot and we've gotten so used to doing it. So it's going to take a while to unwind the habit. So that's what I would use my 30-day breaks for moving forward, you know.
Absolutely. I think the difference when I was doing it was I was always doing it as part of like a fundraising challenge, and I always had the intention to going back to alcohol. What I loved that you mentioned there was about having that break to create distance and space between you and alcohol so that you can actually honestly reflect and review on the relationship rather than just sitting there counting down the days. What are some of the ways, Deb, that somebody can start to dive into that self-exploration to expand that self-knowledge while they're taking a break from alcohol?
Yeah, well, I obviously like listening to podcasts like ours is a great way. Reading books, there's so many, we call them Quit Lit. There's so many books out there that talk about alcohol and not just like memoir. There are a lot of memoirs that are very dark. They call them like drunkalogs, don't they? Yeah, so finding some other books to read, like This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, or William Porter has Alcohol Explained. Laura McCowan has some really lovely books out there. So just taking the time to kind of read about it, read different viewpoints, and also recognize like there's not one way to change your drinking. There's so many different ways that you can explore this, you know, everything from traditionally AA or rehab to all these now, you know, we have this wonderful sober curious movement. And so we have all these online options that weren't there before. And so those can be really great ways to explore your relationship too. And just be like open and curious.
Definitely. And I think when you stop, what happened for me anyway was that the fog started to lift. Like once I had enough distance between me and my last drink, then my clarity of mind returned and I was able to really start to dive into these deeper practices, whether it was meditation, yoga, therapy, like all of that stuff Like you said before, you dance better these days because you've got the brain power back. It's the same with everything you do in life.
Well, I don't know if dance better. You should ask my kids that. I got the choreography.
Deb, you mentioned so you were doing these breaks, you know, you were parenting, but you were struggling and you were drinking more than you would have liked to have been. Was there a specific catalyst that or this day where you said I'm never drinking again, or was there just like a 30-day break that you took that never stopped?
Well, I had so many day ones and so many breaks throughout the years. I mean, like I shared, that picture was from like 2014, I think. 2015, I started exploring it more. I tried naltrexone. I started taking longer breaks. It really wasn't till like 2018 that I read This Naked Mind by Annie Grace and I did an alcohol experiment. And that was very paradigm shifting for me because the model before that I had known about anyway was that this is your fault. It's your problem. It's a moral failing. You can't handle your alcohol. You are the one that's broken. And so Annie Grace's model is more like, okay, you're not broken. Alcohol is a highly addictive toxin that you have been sold a pack of lies about culturally. You know, it's been promoted as this aphrodisiac, as something that helps you sleep, as something that helps your heart, all these kind of like health benefits that are now getting more and more disproven. And so it became, for a while there, it was like very eye-opening, especially as a nurse too. Like, oh, I kind of knew, but I didn't know about alcohol and how it affects your health. And so for me, being able to take myself out of the equation and really examine the effects of alcohol was very, very helpful for me, because when I did it the other way around, it was just like shame and blame and broken and all of those layers of just like self-hate and whatnot. Now, what really like stuck it for me though was marrying those two concepts. So marrying the concept that yes, alcohol is shit for your health. You know, there's big money behind it. There's marketing. Yes. And it might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. So when I could put those two together, then I could really make change. But it took me a long, long time to get there. Like I said, I found Annie Grace in 2018. And then my last day drinking was January 1st, 2020. I call it like a divorce, because remember I was talking about breaking up with alcohol, and I didn't want to break up for a long, long time. I was always searching for that magic pill of moderation.
It's such a perfect way to describe it, isn't it? Because there is such an emotional attachment to alcohol as well, just as you have in a romantic relationship. I remember being in rehab and they actually got us to write a letter to our drug of choice, whether that was alcohol or heroin or whatever it was. And it was a breakup letter, essentially, a goodbye letter. And we wrote that and then we read them out, and it was really, really powerful. It was such a sense of letting go in that moment, but also acknowledging and respecting the fact that with that, there was going to be a lot of grief.
You'd go through the grief process. Absolutely. So just like the stages of grief you go through. And so if you remember those stages of grief, like it starts with denial. And for a long time, I was in denial of that I even had a problem, you know, and then it goes to bargaining. And the bargaining for me was like moderation, making rules. Like if I just do this, if I do that, then I'll be okay. Right. And then there's an anger stage. And the anger stage for me was like, I was really pissed at alcohol and big alcohol. And I think I needed to get to that part too and kind of uncover the truth about it. And then there's some sadness that's further along in those stages of grief. And so there was like this feeling of sadness and loss and kind of missing it. But then eventually you get to acceptance. And that is so helpful. That's where it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. I love like Laura McCown's things that she says, the 9 things about this being your thing, and it sucks that it's your thing. And then they also added an additional stage to the stages of grief, and it's meaning. And so it's now like finding meaning about what we went through. And look at us now, Ash, like now we are sharing our stories. We're helping other people. Like, I do feel like it sucked to go through it, but I think I had to go through it to get to where I am now, and just all paths leading up to becoming someone who helps people change their drinking. Just be with my psychology degree, with nursing, with going through it myself. Like, it's just like, I think that's how it was meant to be.
Yeah, I often have that feeling of looking back and having no regrets, understanding there's a real peace for me around everything I've experienced in my life has led me to the point where I am today. And if a single part of that had been removed, I may not be where I am at this point in my life. And for that, I am truly grateful. I want to touch on this point around alcohol and its impact on our health for a moment longer. I actually saw a meme the other day that referred to alcohol as being in its cigarette era, meaning that we're going to look back on this period of history and be shocked at how much we had normalized the amount of alcohol that we consume as a society. And part of this meme shared a statistic that 0 alcohol beverages are now in greater growth than low alcohol, which I think is such a positive sign to see that there's this appetite. And I think it's only going to get bigger and greater. And I do truly believe that we are going to look back at this period and think to ourselves, just as we did with cigarettes, at one stage there were doctors smoking in campaigns, and today that would just be, you just couldn't even fathom it. Maybe it won't be that extreme, but I do think people are becoming more clued on to, just like you said, just how much marketing and money goes behind essentially selling a type 1 carcinogen to all of us. And today, if alcohol were brought to market, there's no way that it would be legal. As a nurse, with all of your experience, can you share what are some of the health impacts of drinking alcohol to excess?
Well, and it's not even to excess is also the point. Alcohol affects every single system of your body, every organ, nothing is left untouched by alcohol. And so I think that the biggest one, and I'll relate this to health in general. So the number 1 cause of death in the United States, in the world, the global number 1 cause of death is heart disease. Now, we don't always think about alcohol and heart disease, but now we are finding more and more that there is strong correlation between alcohol and heart disease. Alcohol raises your blood pressure. It leads to cardiac arrhythmias. It increases your risk of stroke and heart attack. And so I think that is a big one, and one I like to talk about a lot because it's the one that for so long it was, a glass of red wine is good for your health. And so since then, that has been proven wrong. And they've shown those studies were either biased or done incorrectly. And they were comparing the non-drinkers they were using in that study group were people who were older, and there was a reason. They had other health reasons that they quit drinking. They maybe had an alcohol problem or they had diabetes or they had heart disease. So making them at higher risk to die or have complications. So I think we're starting to unwind this ship that was getting steered in the wrong direction. Your doctor used to recommend a glass of wine. A glass of wine got put on the Mediterranean diet. We have a food pyramid in the United States, and it was it was on there. And
we have it here too.
I think that we'll see that being unwound. We're already seeing The World Health Organization has come out and said no amount of alcohol is safe for your health. The World Heart Federation has said the same thing. Canada has their new guidelines. Ireland is going to release new guidelines. Of course, like France and Italy are upset because they all of their wine and whatnot. But so we're starting to see a backtrack of what happened. So, which is a good thing, right? It's just creating more awareness.
And that's it at the end of the day, isn't it? Like, let's provide all of the accurate information and then allow people to make their own decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I only touched on heart health, but I said there were a lot of other factors with alcohol.
Yeah, what are some of the other ones that people might not be aware of?
Well, an interesting one that you wouldn't think of is osteoporosis. So you're more likely to have osteoporosis and have greater risk of falls and breaking your bones. And that's because when you drink alcohol, your body is not absorbing as many nutrients, and especially calcium and vitamin D. So if you don't have enough calcium and vitamin D, then you're not going to have good bone health. Like, that's just a random one. It also can cause like lung issues because there is a vapor produced with alcohol. I mean, that's how we do our breathalyzer tests, right? Even the vapor is harmful. Of course, there's liver disease that's related to alcohol. There's higher cholesterol. You have an increased risk of dementia, increased risk of strokes. Like, there's just every system is affected by it. And cancer risk is huge related to alcohol.
Now, touching on cancer, I was at a health farm last year doing a detox program, but not from alcohol or drugs, just to try and improve my overall health. And we had a lot of education as part of this program. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was they were explaining how when you consume alcohol, how that goes, it jumps to the front of the line of your liver where everything's being processed. And so any other toxin that's in your body that your body was trying to get rid of, that moves to the back of the line because your body tells itself, we've got to get this alcohol out of our system first. That's how much of a toxin it is. And so that means that all of these other things that are moving around your body may not get priority to be processed, which then can go back into the system and create these cancers and these damaged cells. Does that kind of sound right?
Yeah, well, totally right. Like, when you drink alcohol, your body and your liver goes, oh shit, I gotta get rid of this, right? And so your liver breaks down alcohol into acetaldehyde, and it's the acetaldehyde that is so toxic and poisonous. And that is what's increasing your cancer risk too. And then also in your liver, and we don't really think about this because it's your liver, right? But your liver is also responsible for processing and creating cholesterol. And so that's where you end up with like higher cholesterol levels. So that's leading to heart disease, right? And then it also can lead to an overproduction of triglycerides, which are the fatty acids. And so that's what leads to the fatty liver. Like, literally your liver, it gets full of fat related to the alcohol. And then the other correlation that we don't think about with our liver either is that in your liver, that's where we get glucagon and sugar processing. So that also can affect diabetes and blood sugar and that whole system. So all kinds of things happening in that liver.
Hearing all of that, two things come to mind. The first one is it's so hard to quantify. It seems like such a silent killer in a way because all of these things that are happening, they're happening inside. We don't see them until quite often the very final stages of alcohol poisoning or alcohol overuse. So there's that to contend with. Like, you've got the knowledge, but you're not really seeing it happen. Similar to smoking in a way, I suppose. And then second to that, I think of going back to looking at alcohol like that being your relationship. It's almost like going back to an abusive partner, isn't it?
It's like a toxic relationship, literally. Yeah,
literally.
Totally.
Wow, that's really scary. Deb, you've got so much knowledge in this space, and it's really fascinating to hear, your psychology background coupled with your nursing and then your own experience. I want to know what inspired you to move into this sober space and to help change people's lives and their relationships with alcohol.
Yeah. Well, every time, this always makes me tear up a little bit. I'm getting better at telling my story, though. But I think for the longest time, I just felt so alone and I felt stuck. And I told myself, when I get to the other side, I'm not going to leave anyone behind. And if anyone wants to come to me and say, hey, can you help me? I'm drinking too much. I want to have answers for them. And so that is what really drives me. I just want to help people get better.
It's that extension of what first drew you to nursing, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's my calling. Yeah.
What's been the biggest thing that you've learnt about yourself since getting sober?
The biggest thing I've learned about myself. That's a good question. I want to go towards learning that I can be okay and that I'm enough.
Did you believe in the past that you weren't enough? Was that a core belief that you held on to?
I think I was always trying to prove it. I said with parenting, trying to overcompensate and be the perfect parent and the perfect wife and perfect worker. And that just doesn't exist, and letting that go. I have to show you, I just happen to have this mug though, but it says, I'm proud to be a remarkably average parent.
Yes.
And I'm you know what? I can be okay with that. I can be okay with being okay. And just being enough. That's okay.
I think for me, what happened was when I removed alcohol from my life, I started to, instantly you become proud of yourself because it's not an easy thing to do. But then you start to live a life that's not so self-centered. And for me, anyway, I can only speak from my own experience. I started to live a life where I was focused on helping others. And similar to the work that you're doing today in this day and age, Deb, when you're helping other people, that builds self-esteem. And you're also no longer doing those actions and the behaviors that used to damage your self-esteem. You're not waking up hungover every day, short-tempered. You can hold space for people, be loving, be kind. And so I think that we become okay with being okay, but we're also an enhanced version of the people we used to be. We're our best selves when we're sober. And so I think it's a lot easier to love yourself when you are coming from that place of integrity as opposed to what we were when we were drinking.
Yeah, definitely. I was always letting myself down, and that was just really chipping away at myself. And I also, instead of beating myself up about it and being so disappointed and the self-flagellation, the heavy workouts the next day, whatever, when I was able to let a lot of that go and just be compassionate and kind towards myself, then I was able to make even bigger changes.
Yeah. It's so, so special. We've got a closing tradition here where I love to ask guests, what are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live your life today happy, joyous, and free?
Ooh, 3 non-negotiables. Dang, Ash. Well, my non-negotiable now is not drinking. Number 1.
Awesome. That's a great one.
I just can't even entertain it. And actually, it's such a freeing one too. It's just I'm done with that shit, and why would I ever go back? But also, you're never going back. You divorced. You're done.
Yes.
That's my non-negotiable. Being kind is definitely a non-negotiable. Just lead with kindness.
And is that both ways? So you will outwardly be kind, but also not tolerating unkindness?
Well, I guess it's more outward unkindness towards myself from myself, or are we talking other
or-
people?
Or even others. I only ask because I know that another thing that I've become really good at in my recovery and my sobriety is boundaries. Like I used to be so boundaryless.
Ash, I
I'd
need some help with that.
Okay. We can talk more after the show for sure. Yeah, no, it's one that I've been practicing, but it feels really empowering to be able to sit in your strength and not tolerate people's behaviors that perhaps in the past you would let slide.
Well,
particularly when
yeah, I was going to say, like, I do see where before I wouldn't say anything because I felt like, oh, who am I to say something because I'm a mess up, you know? I'm a fuck up. I don't deserve, you know, I can't stick up for myself. And so now I'm more likely to do that.
Yeah, I love that. All right, number 3, one final non-negotiable.
I don't know why I want to say I was going to go towards food or something. Like, I guess life is short and enjoy it. Do what brings you joy.
What a beautiful note to end on. Deb, we say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one need suffer in silence. So thank you so, so much from the bottom of my heart for coming here onto the show today and sharing your story and your wisdom and your knowledge and everything you do to help others.
Well, thank you, Ash. It was just a delight to connect with you again. And I hope we get to do it in person. Either you can come over here and go skiing, or I'll come down under and visit you in Australia.
Nice. You nailed it. That sounds amazing, Deb. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.